Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is John, and today we are talking about a powerful moment at Clint Eastwood's Gran Torino premiere that changed everything. In this video, we will explore how a red carpet event turned into a deeply human story about compassion, sacrifice, and recognition. December 9th, 2008. The Warner Brothers Studios lot in Burbank, California was glowing under bright lights. Black cars lined up in perfect sequence, photographers stood shoulder to shoulder, and reporters rehearsed their questions with practiced precision. This was not just another movie premiere. This was an event. Gran Torino had already generated enormous attention. It wasn't just a film. It was being seen as a farewell. Clint Eastwood, at 78 years old, had hinted that this might be the last time audiences would see him act on screen. For Hollywood, this was more than entertainment. It was history in motion. The red carpet stretched across the entrance like a stage. A carefully controlled chaos filled the air, camera shutters clicking, voices calling out names, flashes cutting through the night like lightning. Industry giants had gathered, directors, actors, producers, names that shaped generations of cinema. They were all there to honor a man whose career had defined an era. And, at the center of it all, Clint Eastwood. He moved slowly but confidently along the carpet, stopping for interviews, acknowledging familiar faces, and posing with the calm ease of someone who had done this countless times before. His appearance was simple: black suit, no tie, nothing excessive. It was a style that matched his personality: quiet, direct, unpretentious. For nearly 40 minutes, everything followed the expected rhythm of a major premiere. But just beyond the spotlight, there was another story unfolding. Far behind the carefully arranged lines of photographers and media crews, pushed to the edge of visibility, sat a man in a wheelchair. His name was James Patterson. He had arrived hours earlier, long before the lights, before the celebrities, before the energy of the evening had even begun. James was a Vietnam War veteran. Decades earlier, the war had taken his legs. The years that followed had taken much more: his stability, his relationships, his health. Life had become a quiet struggle, lived inside a shared veterans facility, supported by limited resources and fading strength. But there was one thing that remained constant: films. Not just any films, but stories that reflected pain, survival, and redemption. And no filmmaker represented that better to him than Clint Eastwood. To James, Gran Torino was not just a movie. It was something deeply personal. The story of a war veteran confronting his past felt painfully familiar. It was as if someone had taken pieces of his life and placed them onto the screen. That connection is what brought him there. Not to attend the premiere, not to sit among celebrities, just to see Clint Eastwood. Even for a moment. Beside him stood his daughter, Lisa, a woman carrying her own burdens, long work hours, financial pressure, but determined to give her father something meaningful. She had spent months planning this day, arranging transportation, making sure everything was possible. They both knew they wouldn't get inside. That world wasn't meant for them. But maybe, just maybe, they could get close enough to witness it. Security had nearly turned them away. Only after persistent pleading were they allowed to remain, pushed to the very back, far from the action. From where James sat, visibility was almost non-existent. The crowd blocked his view. The barriers separated him from everything. All he could do was listen. He heard the cheers, the camera flashes, the rising excitement, but he couldn't see the man he had come for. Time passed slowly. He asked again and again, "Is he here yet?" And Lisa, trying to stay hopeful, kept checking. Then, finally, the energy shifted. The crowd reacted. Clint Eastwood had arrived. Lisa saw him first, a distant figure surrounded by lights and attention. She described what she could, trying to bring the moment closer for her father. But for James, it wasn't enough. He leaned forward, straining to catch even a glimpse, but there was nothing, just movement, just noise, just distance. And in that moment, something inside him gave way. After everything he had endured, war, loss, years of struggle, it was this simple disappointment that finally broke through his defenses. A tear rolled down his face, quiet, unnoticed by the world around him, except for one person. At that exact moment, something unexpected happened on the red carpet. Clint Eastwood was in the middle of an interview. Bright lights focused on him. Cameras rolled. A reporter asked about the film's deeper meaning, about redemption, about confronting the past. It was a familiar conversation, one he had answered many times. But then, his attention shifted. Somewhere beyond the cameras, beyond the crowd, something caught his eye. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was almost invisible. A figure in the distance, a wheelchair. A man sitting quietly, separated from everything. And something about that image didn't sit right. Clint paused, mid-sentence. The interviewer waited, confused. But Clint wasn't listening anymore. He was looking past the spotlight, past the event, toward something real. Without explanation, he stepped away. He left the interview unfinished, left the cameras behind, and began walking in a direction no one expected. The movement caused confusion instantly. Reporters exchanged looks, photographers shifted their lenses, security personnel moved instinctively, unsure of what was happening. But Clint continued, calm, focused, intent on reaching the back of the crowd. As he approached the barriers, the atmosphere changed again. People began to notice. Whispers spread. Why was he leaving? Where was he going? But Clint didn't slow down. He reached the metal barrier separating the public from the event. And on the other side, he saw him clearly now. James Patterson, head slightly lowered, emotion visible even from a distance. Clint spoke, his voice steady, cutting through the noise. "Were you in the military?" The question seemed simple, but to James, it felt unreal. He turned slowly, and suddenly, the man he had traveled hours to see was standing right in front of him. For a moment, he couldn't respond. The world around him faded, all the noise, all the movement, gone. Clint stepped closer, asking gently about his service. When James managed to answer, the connection became immediate. No introductions needed, no explanations, just understanding. Then something even more unexpected happened. Clint didn't stay behind the barrier. He crossed it, not symbolically, but physically. He moved past the separation, closing the distance completely. Gasps spread through the crowd. Cameras turned rapidly. The moment was unfolding in real time, unscripted, unplanned. Clint knelt beside James, bringing himself to eye level, no longer a celebrity above the crowd, but a man speaking to another man. He thanked him, not as a formality, but sincerely. And that was enough. James broke down completely, not out of sadness, but out of release. Years of struggle, years of feeling unseen, all collapsing into that one moment of recognition. Lisa stood beside them, overwhelmed, trying to process what was happening. Clint asked how long they had been there. The answer stunned him. Hours, waiting, hoping, just to see him. He paused, looked toward the theater entrance, looked back at James, and made a decision. One that would change everything about that night. What followed was something no one at the premiere had planned for. Schedules were tight. The event was carefully organized, every minute accounted for. But Clint Eastwood was no longer thinking about timing. He was thinking about one thing: what was right. He turned to the event organizers and made it clear the premiere would wait, not for a technical issue, not for a delay in arrivals, but for a man who had been standing, well, sitting, outside the spotlight. A veteran, someone whose story mattered more than the schedule. There was hesitation at first, confusion, but Clint's decision carried weight, and within moments, everything shifted. Arrangements were made quickly, access was granted, and then, in front of hundreds of cameras and some of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood, Clint Eastwood did something unforgettable. He personally guided James Patterson through the very space that had once excluded him, down the same red carpet, past the same crowd. But this time, not as an outsider, as a guest of honor. The reaction was immediate. People who had come to celebrate a film found themselves witnessing something far more meaningful. Applause began, not the polite kind, but something deeper, respectful, emotional, real. Inside the theater, seats were adjusted. James was placed at the center of the front row. Clint sat beside him, Lisa on the other side, and for the first time that night, everything felt complete. As the film played, Clint watched more than just the screen. He watched James, every reaction, every moment of recognition, every emotional shift. Because this wasn't just a viewing experience, it was something personal. When the film ended, the room filled with applause again. But James remained still, processing, absorbing. Finally, he spoke. Not in long sentences, just a simple truth. That was my life. And in that statement, everything connected. The story on screen, the life lived in reality, and the moment that brought them together. But the impact didn't end there. Behind the scenes, Clint made sure this wasn't just a one-night experience. He took steps, quiet ones, to improve James's situation. Better living conditions, proper support, a sense of dignity restored. And beyond that, he looked further, at others like James, people who had been overlooked, people who had waited too long in the background. A broader effort began, not publicized, not announced, but real. Helping veterans who needed more than recognition, they needed support. James's life changed in the years that followed, not dramatically overnight, but meaningfully. He reconnected with parts of his life that had once felt lost, found purpose again, and carried that night with him, not as a memory of meeting a celebrity, but as a reminder that he mattered. When he passed away years later, Clint attended quietly. No spotlight, no cameras, just respect. Because in the end, that night was never about a movie. It wasn't about Hollywood, or fame, or even legacy. It was about a moment when someone chose to look beyond the crowd, beyond the barriers, and truly see another human being. And sometimes, that's the most powerful story of all.